The Anker Soundcore Flare 2. No, I told you, no more videos. You're not even the latest model, Sony XB32. The Soundcore Flare 2. It's a £65 speaker. It's a 360-degree speaker. It's looked quite interesting, given that the Soundcore Motion Plus are pound for pound world champion. Comes from the same brand. It's a £65 speaker. We've got woofers firing to the sides, and we've got passive radiators front and back. So 360 degree, but depending on how you are orientating it, it will sound completely different. So in my testing, in my listening, I am doing face-on tests. But you have to bear in mind that not only on axis, I'm calling on axis, you know, because I'm getting stereo left and right, you're not completely losing the sound no matter where you are. Whereas other speakers where they're completely on axis, you go to the back of the speaker and you've completely lost the mid-range and the high end. Now, quickly give you some specs, what I like and don't like about the speaker. First of all, it's one of those really pretty speakers that when you turn it on, you get all these coloured lights. It does look quite nice. I do quite like leaving it on, but it's not, you know, it's not here or there if you're wanting to know about the sound. I will also say we have all our controls on the top. It is nice that I can completely control the lights without having to go into the app, just by using the light button, and I indeed can turn the light feature off completely. We do have a multi-function button in the middle, do have volume up, volume down, and the power button. My biggest peeve about this speaker is it's impossible to see those. Now, if I've got direct light hitting it and it's really good light, I can just about make it out. But for 90% of the time, I'm struggling to quickly see where to hit the power button, the volume up and down, the multi. It's ridiculous. They're tiny buttons. They're the same color as the top. Everything is black. It's not raised. It's not a different color. That is what I like about this speaker least. On the back, we have our difficult to open flappy thing. Oh, there you go. We have our USB-C connector. There is no auxiliary. We have bass up technology, which I'll get onto in this video. But according to Anker, wow, this is new technology, bass. I don't know if you've ever heard bass before, but we have a button that allows you to hear it. And you can, of course, disengage this incredible technology bass up feature. And then we have our Bluetooth light if you want to see if you're connected. In terms of actual specs on paper, I mentioned it's a £65 speaker. It did come out last year. What I did find interesting, given the size of this speaker, it runs on 7.4 volts. It's not a huge battery. So on the headline feature, you'd have 7.4 volts, 2,600 milliamps, which is not much. But of course, that's actual in 3.7 volt terms, 5,200 milliamp battery, but that doesn't augur well for actual battery life. But yeah, it's nice you've got a bit more power, 7.4 volts, but in normal terms that's 2,600 milliamp hours in terms of actual capacity, and that does not translate well into battery power. If I try and play this on maximum volume, I'm getting 1 hour 21 minutes, as was pointed out to me by Godspeed, point out when you get these, especially the smaller speakers, and you're playing them on maximum volume, voltage sag, that as the voltage decreases, you're getting a rapid decrease in the voltage, under voltage protection kicks in, and although there is plenty of juice left in the battery, it's the under voltage protection that is turning the speaker off. So in absolute maximum volume, 1 hour 21 minutes, 66% volume, I'm getting just over 4 hours. So that's okay, 66%, but it's not world shattering. But it's down to the fact that they're running at 7.4 volts for a bit more power rather than the 3.7 volts where you'd get a bit more capacity out of it. It is the basic SBC codec. We are getting the latest Bluetooth 5. You can do true wireless stereo pairing. It's a 20 watt rated speaker. It charges at 5 volts 2 amps, as most of these do. Weighs 600 grams. It's not particularly heavy. It's nice hand holdable, although I'm not the greatest fan of these particular form factors, but as 360-degree speaker codes, it's okay. I don't know, there's something about this kind of a shape that I don't particularly like. And it was as good as any of my other speakers when I'm testing it on YouTube. 80 milliseconds delay is just about not noticeable, and that's as good as any of the speakers that I'm personally getting with my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. Now, it's Anker. We do get a reasonable app, and we do get the ability to embed your own EQ settings. The only time I really use EQs when I can embed it into firmware. I had to play around with the app. Now, the biggest problem with the app is if you're trying to EQ past default mode, you've got the 80 Hz, 150 Hz first two sliders, and pushing that, certainly the 80 Hz in any form at all, you're going to immediately run into very, very obvious distortion. Unpleasant. It has a tendency to make some farting noises in terms of the bass. Certainly does it if you try and attempt to push it. So I've pushed the 150 Hz a notch. I would have liked to have pushed the 80 Hz and the upper bass a bit more. You can't without running into real problems. So the best I can manage with my EQ and for my ears, matching default setting, but the default setting I found a bit dull, lacking any sparkle. So I've added a bit of sparkle. It's pretty flat, and I'll get onto that. So just to say, my custom settings here, it's basically default, slightly less warmth in the mids, but adding a lot more sparkle to my ears. So let's straight away have a listen, because there are several modes on this. If you go into the app, chill, voice, and flat. And of course, the flat modes are never flat. I don't know what they mean by flat then. Maybe they just mean it will leave you feeling flat. I don't know. This is a comparison of the EQ modes, including, I should say, by the way, the incredible bass up technology and using my custom mode and default mode. First of all, better with or without X-Bass? I think we're going to know, but X-Bass off, X-Bass on. I would say it's bass light rather than a bass boost with X-Bass on. From now on, my recordings are with X-Bass on. We're not talking something subtle, we're talking 7 decibels less if you don't put X-Bass on at 60% volume. So from now on, X-Bass on. I wanted to know if I leave the lights on, Does it make any difference if some of the power is now being used not by the processing but by the lights? Lights off, look at the 200 Hertz, lights on, it's almost a slight boost. So we're not talking anything hugely significant, but lights on, if I look now at 90 Hertz, lights on, lights off, now I get a bit more, maybe not quite deep bass, but the bass itself. So you pay your money, takes your choice. A little bit of difference in the bass, but nothing you're really going to hear. My custom mode, default mode. My custom mode basically adds a teeny bit in the bass. Now, I can't push that bass. If you try and push this bass at all, especially the 80 Hertz, even to 1 dB, as soon as you start pushing the volume, you are going to get distortion. So you really can't do much with the EQ. My EQ is basically default mode, but it sounds a bit dull in default mode. I'm adding a little bit of sparkle, I'm adding a little bit of high end. That's the main difference with these settings here between default and my custom mode. Chill out mode seems a small reduction in the bass, about decibel and a half, and it pushes lower mids and the mids, so slightly warmer. Flat mode, well, it's not very flat. You lose 3.2 dB from the bass, and that is just too much for me. The voice mode, as opposed to the chill mode, reduces bass even more, 2.7 dB, and pushes the entire mids region, 250 Hertz to 4 kilohertz. That is the original track. The Soundcore Flare 2 cannot reproduce that original track, but it is a good track to use because you can see how linear that slope is and how deep that bass goes. The bass peak, 36 Hertz. This is a good test track. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be using my custom settings because it's basically default with a bit more sparkle, and I'm going to leave the bass up technology on because it's fantastic technology, and without it, it's, to my ears, basically a bass cut. Just to show you in terms of actual frequency response, remember there is a high degree of margin of error in my frequency response testing, but it's a good indicator of what the speaker's actually doing. My frequency response measurements, custom mode frequency response, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100% volume. Apart from the 20%, it's incredibly linear in the sound you're getting. It does mean no real dynamic bass boost. The bass is relatively the same to the rest of the frequency response, except at 20% you can clearly see it's way more bass heavy, sloping all the way down from 70 Hertz to 1 kilohertz. The rest of the volumes, upper bass peak, extending pretty nicely. Now, the point to note here is it's pretty flat. If I look at 60%, I'm peaking 71.5 decibels, I'm dipping 64 decibels, 7.5 decibels, that's within plus or minus 3.75 decibels, measuring down to 70 Hertz in the bass. That's really flat, and it's flat all the way up, even with so-called bass boosts. At 20%, it's pretty flat. We do have the peak, 2.5 kilohertz, 6.5 kilohertz. It does tail off in the high end, even with my boosting the high end in the EQ. So basically, we are talking pretty flat. Quite pleasantly surprised how flat. Bear in mind, that's with bass up technology on. We're talking plus or minus 4 decibels, 70 Hertz to about 15 kilohertz. It's starting to roll off from 70 Hertz. It is dipping a bit in the mids, so there is a lack of a little bit of warmth, but bear in mind, overall, it is pretty flat. But pleasantly surprised, given it as a 360-degree speaker, and I'm measuring it on axis, but that does mean the woofers are firing away from me. They're not on axis, they're firing left and right. So I was pleasantly surprised with that. And I think you should have a quick listen now. X-Bass technology on, my custom mode settings, 53% volume.
Look mad when they pass you. Let's talk about right when it's past due. Raise a glass to know you don't gotta fight alone. You don't gotta fight alone. Don't be so
So I do have some other 360-degree speakers, probably the most similar ones, certainly at this price level, that I've got will be the Earfum Uboom and the Stormbox. £59 Stormbox, £49 at the moment retail, the Uboom. So a little bit of difference in price, but look how similar, almost identical. It's almost as though they've, well, I won't say it, I don't want to get sued, but they are pretty similar, don't you think, in form factor ways. So how do they compare sound-wise?
Oh, my darkest memories, now let me fall back. But you'll be there, ready to rescue me if I go out of track. You can get away with it, 'cause you make me love my imperfections, answer all my questions, just to show me it's on the other side of inhibition. No apologies, my baby. I do it all 'cause I'm feeling so good. It's in my mind, I'll make it work, I won't give up, I'll take my chances, prove them wrong. People who keep asking for a plan B. No one can handle this fire, got the blood of a tiger, and I don't care anymore. I'm done with trying to feel worthy, gotta know that I earned this. I'll get the life I deserve. I'll let it go.
So that's a win for me, I would say, at these volumes for the Soundcore Flare 2. Now, the Earfun Uboom, I'm playing in indoor mode. It's brighter and it's a little bit thinner in indoor mode. You can go even brighter if you turn on outdoor mode. So it has the ability to sound very sharp, very clear, cut into vocals or whatever, anything you want definition from because of how bright it is. However, in terms of a more balanced, fuller sound, I do think that goes to the Flare 2. In terms of Stormbox, I don't think it fares very well in A/B comparisons because it is a bit dull at the high end, but it does have a nice form factor, and it does have a decent bass, and it does vary quite a bit between how you orientate it. So I'm playing it with left to right, but you can actually do it this way, so you get more benefit then of the surface, you can get even more bass, and of course then your passive radiators are firing freely rather than that way around, but that's the best way you're going to get your left and right. If you do that, you're either covering one, so you actually got to do it that way, and then the left and right's going that way. So I'm looking at you know, as someone who does prefer on-axis, I'm doing near on-axis testing. You have to think about how you're going to use the speakers. However, for me, I will say, that doesn't sound too bad long term, but it sounds quite dull in all these A/B comparisons. So its tuning doesn't fare well when it comes to A/B. Now, I've also got the more expensive Minirigs. We've got the Minirig MK3 and the Minirig Mini 2. So we're talking £100, £140, whereas the Flare is only £65. So it's on half the price than the Mark 3, and also considerably cheaper than that teeny weeny little Mini 2. I do love the Mini 2, but obviously you've got to judge it in terms of the size. So how do they actually sound in comparison? Now, I will say I am playing them in their 3. The app, the Minirig app, does allow you to play it on axis with what they call studio mode, so it's more balanced. But it really is meant to be played this way up, firing upwards, where you're getting the benefit, the bass benefit of the surface that it's laying on. So that I have recorded it firing upwards, and I have recorded this on axis. Bear that in mind.
I've been so damn selfish. I hurt your feelings. Time is putting all its blame on me. And I was thinking.
So as much as I like the mini rigs, the first big problem they have when you're playing a single one is their mono. The mono and they're firing up. So in the real world, you could be listening quite close, or you're listening at angles that are more suitable. But when I'm doing my A/B comparisons and I'm recording on axis, but recording in the same way, but then firing up because that's how it suits its default tuning, it's not going to benefit it when it comes to A/B. And also, of course, it's mono versus stereo. So again, on quick A/B, it's going to favor the stereo sounding speaker. These make much more sense in an ecosystem. I will say, remarkably clear vocals with the Mini, but you're just not going to get the bass that you're going to get from these other speakers. It's all about that teeny weeny size, but then you can add a subwoofer, or you can add a second one for stereo. So I'm not saying, the Earfun sound, the Flare 2, which I do think on these listens is a kind of more enjoyable if I'm listening on axis. If you're listening true 360 degrees, 360 degrees, may prefer the mini rigs because they're going to sound actually the same no matter where you sit. Whereas all of these other 360 degree speakers are not true 360 degree speakers. They will sound different depending on the side or the back or wherever you're sitting. Whereas with the mini rigs firing upwards, they truly sound the same all around. So if you're truly moving around, they may still be the best. But in terms of listening on axis like this, I do prefer the Flare 2. But these are all about when you build the system. Now there is one other interesting one. It's called the Wonderboom 2. It's a speaker I do quite like. Mainly I really like the form factor. It's not that much bigger than the Minirig Mini. It's certainly smaller than these other 360 degree speakers. And it's a fabric design with rugged plastic top and bottom. It's very throwable. It's very, throw it in your rucksack. So what can it do? It's much smaller. How does it compare?
The labyrinth will guide you far away to a place where senses will decay. Your ghosts and minds will shadow play. I got your world upside down.
So the Flare 2, from my opinion, at the same volume, does sound better. But I find the Wonderboom very, very safe. It has a very clever tuning. In its own way, it's not far off the tuning of the Extreme 2. Obviously, it doesn't have the bass that it has, but it has that very strong upper bass boost, a bit of a dig out, and then it gives you a bit more of the high end. So you're not that aware of what you're missing when you just listen to the one speaker on its own. I find it's a lot of fun and very safe. It's not going to sound bad with anything, but it's not going to sound brilliant with anything. Whereas the Flare 2 can sound pretty nice with a lot of stuff. But I do like it when it's combined because it's a safe sound combined with a very fun form factor. So that's volume for volume. But what is the headroom on all these speakers? Stick them all up to maximum volume and test them. And I will now, because it's now band loudness, I will test the mini rigs on axis, because obviously that's when it's going to be at its loudest. Otherwise it's going to be at a disadvantage firing upwards. But if you want to know how loud it can go, and in the real world of course you can do that and it would sound louder. I'm going to use the outdoor modes where appropriate. So a full test of which one of these speakers goes loudest and how much louder.
Don't come crawling back to me. This nightmare is swallowing me whole. This nightmare on me. This nightmare what just takes its soul. This nightmare in me. Don't blame yourself for everything that you've seen. Blame it all on a bad dream. Why do you think you're the only one who understands what's going on? Don't go crawling around your heart for me. You broke the lock and stole the key. This nightmare is swallowing me whole. This nightmare on me. This nightmare, what just takes its soul. This nightmare in me. Don't blame Manila for the things you don't want in. Cause everyone will break your heart. Don't blame Manila for the things that you don't want in. Don't come crawling back to me. Don't come crawling back to me. Don't come crawling back to me. This nightmare is swallowing me whole. This nightmare on me. This nightmare, what just takes its soul. This nightmare in me.
Maximum volume, Minirig MK3, way louder than the others, extraordinarily. The Mini 2 in second place, but note basically 4 dB between them, but then ahead of the rest. Again, Wonderboom outdoor mode, big surprise to me, in third place, and then in default mode, Flare 2, Earfum Uboom outdoor mode, indoor mode. And lastly, in terms of absolute loudness, the Stormbox. And a huge difference. 25 LUFS, 15 LUFS, 10 decibels difference. So that's huge. That's to be said. The Minirigs have the advantage that it's a mono speaker, it's one driver, albeit 360 when it's facing up. You turn it on its side, because I'm trying to get as loud as it will go. It has a clear advantage. It's completely on axis, whereas the other speakers are not completely on axis. Left, right, woofers, tweeters on these speakers, they are off axis. So you have to say the two Minirigs, I did give a huge advantage to in terms of absolute loudness. But I figured if it's about absolute loudness, configure them in their loudest mode. Now, we know that if you reduce the bass and take that spare amplifier power and put it at the high end, it goes louder in perceived terms because it takes less power to drive the high end. So these outdoor modes cut bass. So Wonderboom, indoor, outdoor, if the bass is cut, the highs are increased, it goes louder, but you've got less bass. It's going to sound thinner and tinnier. Earfun, outdoor, indoor, Stormbox. So in terms of what's still a decent listen, let's look at the bass. Bit of a different story then. So the Minirig MK3 does come out on top, bass peak -30, say lower bass 60 Hz. You can do better. And it's the Flare 2 with custom mode. There's actually more low bass if we talk about 60 Hz and not that much difference in bass peak, 31.7. So of course, you don't go as loud, it's easier to hang on to the bass. But in terms of a more balanced listen, it's interesting. You look at the so-called quieter speakers, they are holding on to more bass. Even the Stormbox, 10 dB in absolute loudness, -42 is more deeper bass than the Minirig MK3. And by the way, I'm skipping over the second place Minirig Mini 2 because there's no real bass going on. So it is impressive for its size. It is impressive what it does. But in terms of going loud and still having satisfying listen, I'm skipping over that because it hasn't got the bass peak or the deeper bass. In terms of the speakers that didn't go as loud, the Flare 2 holds up well. Even the Stormbox in last place holds up pretty well. But it's way quieter even than the Flare, like 3 dB quieter. That to me gives the advantage to the Flare 2. The other interesting one, the Wonderboom in default mode. Now in outdoor mode, obviously cutting bass, more highs, it sounds louder. But in default mode, given its size, -32, -63, okay, doesn't have much deeper bass. But in terms of the bass peak, it actually holds up well. -32 compares to -31.7, almost basically the same bass peak as the Flare 2, not that far off the Mark III. So I gave the Mark III an advantage by placing it completely on axis in this test. I'm going to redo it now, but with the Mark III now off axis in 360-degree mode, the Wonderboom in default mode, and the Flare 2 in custom mode, because I believe overall, in terms of going loud and still being a decent listen, these are the 3 that come out best on this test. These for me were the 3 most interesting. So I'm going to redo my maximum test. I'm now going to put this in true 360-degree orientation, so it is firing upwards. I'm recording at 45 degrees. That's the fairest way to record the Minirig. It's getting the benefit of the surface, and it's how your ears will probably be listening to it. Whereas with the Wonderboom in its default mode, Soundcore Flare 2 with bass up technology, with bass up and my custom settings, maximum volume.
She loves me, yeah, she needs to know I love her. I wonder if we'll make it through this summer. Just wanna touch like back when we were younger. Yeah. Why don't you love me, love me, love me? Touch me, touch me, touch me no more. Why don't you love me, love me, love me? Touch me, touch me, touch me no more. Love me, love me, love me. Touch me, touch me, touch me. Love me, love me, love me. Touch me, touch me, touch me.
I'm so divided, starstruck, but haters got some indecisive. I'm over fighting, I just can't wake up, cold and sleep alone. This boy's some trouble. When he's around, my problems seem like double. His stupid eyes put me on ice, so no, no. Don't slow me down, don't wanna do this solo.
Why don't you love me, love me, love me? Touch me, touch me, touch me no more. Why don't you love me, love me, love me? Touch me, touch me, touch me no more. Love me, love me, love me. Touch me, touch me, touch me. Love me, love me, love me. Touch me, touch me, touch me.
So a bit of a different story when I'm doing it in this orientation, 45 degrees face on, because the difference, it's still, the Mark III is still the loudest, but because of the amount of bass reduction as it gets to loudest, and the fact that it's, you know, you're not completely on axis, you're at 45 degrees, which, let's be fair, is the preferred listening axis for this speaker. Actually, measuring the deepest bass on the Flare 2, albeit you've now got a passive radiator directly at you, and that's going to favour the Flare 2. Obviously, however I do it, it's going to favour one or the other. For you to make a decision of how you're going to listen. But then, I do, you know, there's no real deep bass, but there's a clever upper bass boost on the Wonderboom that hides its hollow nature and its non-flat nature. It is a lot of fun, especially combined with its form factor. I do like the Wonderboom. I'm not saying it's a hi-fi listen in any way. I'm saying it's a lot of fun, and it's nice to live with. I do like the sound of the Flare 2 with my custom settings, and I do like putting the lights on. I've just turned it off. Let's turn it back on. So I do like having the lights on. It's not here or there, absolutely. But you know, if two speakers sounded identical and looked identical, and one had lights and one doesn't, you'd probably go for the one with lights. So I do like the lights. I used to, you know, take the mickey out of speakers with lights, but yeah, at the end of the day, it does trick your brain when you're looking at it and listening into thinking there's a bit more of an atmosphere going on than you might otherwise be thinking. So yeah, if you want the ultimate loudest speaker, the one that's going to perceivably be the loudest, it's going to be the Mark III. The problem is, it's one speaker, it's true mono, whereas the Flare 2, you can get stereo when you're face on, left, right, left, and again, the same thing with the Wonderboom, which is, this is all metal. This is, and these float in water. Both of them will float. You can drop, you know, IPX7, you can drop them into 1.5 meters for 30 minutes. You're not going to do that. This is, they say, splash proof, but it's a different kind of form factor. It's a more serious speaker, but it's still going to be mono, and less rugged, as in going to the beach and stuff like that and having near a pool. Your pays your money, takes your choice. For me, the Minirig is all about the ecosystem and how you can use just one or you know, a whole load of the speakers all joined up in Bluetooth or wired, however you want. But when it comes to a single one, mono is mono. I do like to hear a bit of a stereo sound stage. Look, I'm not saying it's, you know, 100-meter soundstage you're getting with these speakers, but however you want to say, or you can or you can't hear a stereo when the drivers are that close to each other, you certainly get a minimal phase difference, which is what stereo is all about. That does trick you into some spatial imaging. It does sound quite pleasant to the ears. I think I covered quite a bit there, and I hope you got something out of my video. Thank you for watching.